Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs. In this episode, we'll be in Matthew 27, starting in verse 27, going all the way through verse 44, as we think about it's technically three sections, but they all get at the same point, which has to do with Jesus' crucifixion. Now, last time, we were talking about Jesus versus Pilate, as Jesus has a conversation with the governor Pilate, the Roman governor, and he's working through things there. Pilate's trying to ask, is it true that you're the king? And Jesus says, that's up to you to decide. Well, Pilate decides, no, he's not the king, but he also decides he's going to condemn Jesus anyway, because it's just easier for him at the end of the day. And so he condemns the righteous one and lets the murderer go free. He condemns Jesus, hands him over while freeing Barabbas, the terrorist and insurrectionist Barabbas. Pilate lets him go free. The Jews vote for him to go free so that they can condemn Jesus instead. So let's start reading now in Matthew 27 and verse 27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's residence and gathered the whole company around him. They stripped him and dressed him in a scarlet robe. They twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and placed a staff in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him, took the staff, and kept hitting him on the head. After they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they found a Cyrenian man named Simon. They forced him to carry Jesus' cross. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they gave him wine mixed with gall to drink, but when he tasted it, he refused to drink it. After crucifying him, they divided his clothes by casting lots. Then they sat down and were guarding him there. Above his head, they put up the charge against him in writing, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then two criminals were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, with the scribes and elders, mocked him and said, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, so let God rescue him now, if he takes pleasure in him." For he had said, "I am the King of the Jews." In the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him taunted him. What do you see in this story, this set of stories? 3 paragraphs, 27 to 31, 32 to 37, and 38 through 44. What do you see in these 3? It's 3 paragraphs, and yet one theme, one recurring idea that comes up over and over and over again. It's this idea of mockery. Mockery because he is the King of the Jews. You see it in verse 28 and 29. The soldiers take him away. The soldiers are the ones who are going to prepare him and actually enact the crucifixion on him. So the Roman soldiers take him away. They put fancy robe on him, and they give him a little crown. They make a crown and put it on his head. They give him a little staff or reed of some sort, mocking him as the king, because these are kingly pictures and kingly things. And so we give Jesus all these kingly images, and we bow down to him, and we call him the king, and then we take it all away and beat him and mock him and kill him. They look at the King of the Jews, they call him, in verse 29, and the Roman soldiers mock the king as they drag him away to murder him. To be fair, Romans are under a real king, a real earthly king, Caesar, right? And so any Jewish king is not going to command their respect. Any Jewish king is going to be irrelevant to them, to be fair. And so they treat him like that. It's irrelevant, but more than that, it's the work of a traitor to be the king, to be the earthly king, to rule a kingdom. No, Caesar's the one who rules the earth. Thank you very much. And if you're trying to establish your own kingship, Caesar will remove you from that position in not a very nice manner. This is Roman policy doing what it does best, is removing foreign kings. So as they're making fun of Jesus, they're making fun of him because he's the king of no nation, no patch of ground on earth. He's not the ruler of any of that because Caesar is better. Well, he's not the ruler of any of that, but it's not because Caesar is better. It's because he's the ruler over the spiritual side, not the physical side. He doesn't care about owning a city and owning one territory and letting, 50 people worship him from that zone. He's worried about all of Earth, and he's on the lookout for all of people for all time. That's what he's interested in. And so, oh no, I guess we don't have, I guess I don't have a palace or a city or a nation necessarily. That doesn't bother Jesus. That was never what he was about. And so as they're mocking this king of the Jews, they have a right to mock the king of the Jews because it's ridiculous and Caesar is the king on earth. But also they're mocking the king who is the king of them after Caesar is gone. After all of the Caesars are gone, after the world is gone. They're making fun of that king and trying to kill that king. That's not going to work out very well for them, ultimately, even if it seems normal and right for them to do while it's here on the earth. This guy is setting himself up against Caesar. Let's laugh at him because his rebellion was comical. If it was a rebellion, gather 12 guys around him and then get arrested by his own people and killed off by Rome. That's not a very impressive picture for an earthly king, but Jesus was never going to be an earthly king. So even as they mock him, part of it's justified, but mostly it's only justified in a sense. There are air quotes on that. It's only justified in the sense that they don't understand who Jesus is and what his purpose really is. But they mock him as they're getting ready to pull him out and take him away to crucify him. They then get on the road. They find another guy named Simon from Cyrene, not Simon Peter, Jesus's follower, but a different Simon who has to step up and carry Jesus's cross for him and be with him through this part of the ordeal. If Simon Peter, Jesus's disciple and the foremost advocate of him, of how he was going to stay faithful to Jesus even when everyone wasn't, if Simon Peter had stayed faithful, this would be him. But he didn't. Jesus's friend wouldn't stay faithful, and so a random Simon is called upon to give Jesus help. Simon Peter is going to read that later on, and he's going to get told that by Jesus and by the Holy Spirit and everyone else who writes a record later on. He's going to figure out there was a different Simon there. And that's going to impact him probably like nothing else. I think that's safe to say. He could have been there. He should have been there. And yet, when Jesus needed a Simon to rely on, his friend was not reliable. That's what Peter will end up remembering. But they bring Jesus to this place of the skull. It's a hill outside of the city of Jerusalem, not too far outside. It's pretty close by. They give him some wine mixed with gall. It's a form of painkiller, from what I understand, a form of medicine, numbing some of the pain or dulling some of the pain. He decides against it. He's not going to drink it. Why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because he needs to feel the full extent of everything that's coming on him. Maybe it's just because he knows he's going to need all of his wits and will about him, and drinking wine is not going to help. I don't know why he denies it or why he ignores it, but he does. And in verse 35, they crucify him. If you don't know what crucifixion is, it's the act of uh, having a metal symbol. It looks like a uppercase or lowercase t in the English language, depending on which version of the cross you're thinking about. And you essentially nail someone to the T. You nail someone to this block of wood, and then you raise the block of wood up, and um, that person is nailed with their arms stretched out on either side of them, which I don't understand all of medicine, but something about having your arms outstretched leads itself to suffocation. It is hard to breathe, especially when your arms are outstretched and up, which as you tire, being hung on the cross for multiple hours, um, you get tired, your body starts to weigh heavily on your arms, and that starts to constrict your breathing. Eventually, you'll die by suffocation, but it's hours and hours later, typically. Um, it's not a fun process to go through. It's the worst form of execution that's ever been made. It's probably safe to say. I don't know every form, but this is the worst. The Babylonians came up with it, if I remember correctly, but Rome perfected it. This is the punishment for the worst criminals, or for people who defied Rome, uh, people whom Rome had conquered, but then they spat in the face of their conquerors, and Rome got rid of them. No Roman citizen was allowed to go through this. Rome would not allow its own people to be put through this. They had an option, and they could always appeal to just have their head taken off with a sword. Much easier. But this is what Jesus has to go through. A torture Rome would not even do to its own people, just the people that they very much hate. And this is all happening to whom? In verse 37, they hang up a little sign over his head up there somewhere. A sign which says, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Again, mocking him. He is their king. He is the king of everyone. And yet they call him King of the Jews, and they mock him, and they get rid of him, even though he does have authority. But it's not just the Roman soldiers. No, it's also the two criminals who are with him. I assume they're also Jewish. I assume that's why they're in the city of Jerusalem or nearby. We're not told that, but that's what I assume. Two criminals. Luke's account will say thieves. They're crucified with Jesus. They've obviously done something bad enough to get hung on crosses for, and they're hanging up there with him. Those who are walking by in front of him, verses 39, 40, 41, 42, 43 as well. It just keeps going. Those walking by in front of him, the scribes and the Pharisees, the regular Israelite people, and whoever else is there. It's not just the Romans, now it's the Jews who are walking in front of him, making fun of him. Having seen all his miracles, having heard all of his teaching, having borne witness to the fact that God has been with him, they are now fully on board with murdering God's messenger. Even if they don't see him as God himself, they see him as the messenger of God, but they don't want to hear the message, and so they mock him and make fun of him as they are killing him. It's a lot easier to ignore what you're supposed to do when you can make fun of it and get rid of the messenger. Get rid of how you figured out about it. If you have a Bible and God is telling you to do something through the Bible, it's a lot easier to just throw the Bible away than it is to start changing something fundamental about your life. That's essentially what they're doing. Instead of changing themselves, they change the exterior situation so that they can be evil and God will not make them feel as bad about it. This is incredible self-interest from this group of Jews who recognize who he is. They literally say he's the king of Israel in verse 42, king of Israel as opposed to king of the Jews. That's evidence that Israel is speaking about it, not the Jewish people, or not the Roman people talking about the Jews. He saved others, he can't save himself. He is the king of Israel, let him come down now. And what? You'd believe in him? Let him do a miracle, come off the cross, and then we'll believe in him. Did you not believe when he healed people? Did you not believe when he cast out the demons? Did you not believe when he made the blind people see? Did you not believe when he healed the paralytic? Did you not believe when he stopped the wind and the waves from being a storm? Did you not believe when he just changed weather? Why would you believe if he just undoes the nails on the cross and walks down? They're not going to believe. They don't want to believe. They want to get rid of the messenger, and it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter who the messenger is. It doesn't matter what the messenger says. They want to get rid of him instead of taking responsibility for the sin and the evil in their own lives. The Romans make fun of him. The Jews make fun of him. The criminals on the crosses in verse 44, those criminals are making fun of him. Jesus is being mocked the whole way through because he is the king of the Jews. That is true. He's the king of all people. And yet they're destroying him and mercilessly making fun of him all the while they're doing it. Matthew is the gospel of the kingdom. Matthew is the gospel that shows Jesus as the king and all of the work he's gone to and everything good about that situation. Matthew is the gospel that explains who Jesus is and why you should follow him. When you read that story, why would you ever want to name Jesus as the king? Why would you want Jesus to be your king? This is what your king is going through, right? This is what this guy's going through. Anyone who follows after him is going to get the same treatment and even worse. Why would we want to follow someone like that? What's the point? Well, notice throughout this story, how much does Jesus talk? In fact, in the past chapter, how much has Jesus spoken? If you have a Bible that uses the red letters, it's very easy to see. In chapter 27, verses 1 through 44, Jesus speaks once in the end of verse 11 when he says, "You say so." And that's it. There is no call for vengeance, although he could, and he is totally justified in doing so. There is no call for vengeance against these people. There is no wrath being outpoured here. There's no resistance being put up. There's no complaint of any kind. Jesus is willing to go through all of this from those who hate him because he is God's sacrifice to save even those who hate him. This king is willing to give up everything to save those who hate him. How much more will he give up everything to save those who love him? Why would you make Jesus your king? From this section, from this chapter, it seems like all we'd get is a lot of trouble. But realistically, what Jesus shows us in all of this is that he's capable of a whole lot more grace than we could ever exceed. Even the evil people who are taunting him, making fun of him, and destroying them, he doesn't complain against them. He doesn't destroy them in return, but he dies for them so that they would have a chance to live with him later on down the line. That's why you should follow this king. Yes, physically it may be uncomfortable and you may have to sacrifice things. People may be against you and they will make fun of you and destroy you and do all sorts of things against you. But at the end of the day, It doesn't matter what everyone else does. It matters how Jesus thinks about you and how Jesus treats you. He's willing to be merciful. Even to those who are horrible to him, he's willing to extend mercy up to a point. But even murdering him hasn't hit that point yet. If you want someone who's merciful and good and who wants to help you, you go after Jesus. You don't go after the Romans. You don't go after the Jews. You don't go anywhere else. You go after Jesus, the King, not just of the Jews, not just of Israel, but Jesus, the King of everyone. Because he's willing to save even those who hate him. He's willing to offer them an opportunity. So how much more would he offer the opportunity to those who love him? That's where we'll leave it off for now. And next week, we'll pick up with the end of the story, at least the end of chapter 27. Jesus, once you're on the cross, let's just say you don't come off of it. And he will not live through the night. He will not live through this torture and execution. We'll have to look at that next time and see what that means for all of us moving forward. That's where we'll leave it, and that'll do it for this week. Hopefully there's something helpful in there that you get to grasp onto and to take and think about this next day, the next few hours, or the next week as we go forward. And hopefully you enjoyed and found something beneficial in it. And I will see you on the next episode of Biblical Breadcrumbs.